All right, I hope you can see my slides clearly. And I want to say good afternoon or even good morning or good evening, depending on where you're located today. And greetings from Tokyo, from Japan. It is a real pleasure to discuss with you my work on ethical global citizenship education at this webinar organized by the community of international higher education and the Education University of Hong Kong. And again, I want to thank Professor Anatoly Oleksiyenko for inviting me to deliver this online seminar. My name is Emiliano Bosio, and I'm a professor of education based in Japan at Toyo University. I authored and co-authored multiple scientific articles with the focus on global citizenship, critical transformative education, ethical values, and social justice. And I had the opportunity to collaborate with educators located worldwide, both in the global north and the global south, some of whom Anatoly mentioned, and Carlos Alberto Torres, Henry Giraud, Peter McLaren, Youssef Akli, Dan Shuttle, and many others. So that was a precious opportunity. And my recent books include, as mentioned in this excellent introduction, at least some of my recent books include Conversations on Global Citizenship Education by Routledge, that you can see on screen. And then just recently, Global Citizenship Education in the Global South with Professor Youssef Akli, who is based in South Africa. And this is published by Broad. And some of the forthcoming projects include the emergence of the Ethical Engage University, with Professor Gaz Gregoruti, who is based in the United States. This will be published by Springer. And also the book Value Creating Education with Professor Maria Guajardo, who is based in Japan. This book project will be published by Routledge. And currently I'm editing with Carlos Alberto Torres and William Gaudelli a special issue in UNESCO IB Prospects, Comparative Journal of Curriculum Learning and Assessment, on the values and pedagogy of global citizenship education. And in the same journal, UNESCO IB Prospects, I'm also editing the special issue, Global Citizenship Education, Curriculum and Pedagogy in the Global South, Embracing the Decolonial Shift. So if you're interested in critical and ethical values and citizenship education, please do get in touch. Let me also mention that I'm the editor of the Global Citizenship Education Interview Series, and this is an interview series on global citizenship publicly available on YouTube. And the interview series welcomed more than 40 scholars worldwide, including Professor James Banks, Professor Betty Lisk, Seymour Magidson, Catherine Hervin from the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens in Vienna, in Austria. So the relevance of this video interview series is that, first of all, it's a very useful pedagogical tool for graduate and undergraduate students to really grasp in simple terms, in dialogic terms, the notion of global citizenship. But it's also useful for educators who are seeking to develop their theoretical understanding of global citizenship education into teaching practice. And I should say that it's also useful for general viewers and audience who are interested in learning more about the history, the philosophy, and practice of global citizenship education. So this is publicly available for free. Anyone can access. So I thought that it was useful and perhaps relevant to this discussion, briefly mention this with you today. Now, what is interesting about this webinar today is that you will get from me diverse perspectives on global citizenship education in higher education from a scholar who is located in Japan, but has interacted with academics located worldwide, both in the global north and the global south. So, for example, I had the privilege to work with scholars located in South Africa, in Tanzania, in Trinidad and Tobago, in Malawi, in Ghana, India, Zimbabwe, Mexico, Jordan, the United States, the United Kingdom, Israel, Canada, Brazil, Italy, South Korea, China, and of course, Japan itself. And today, we have a large audience, and some attendees are new to global citizenship and global citizenship education, and this will include some of my students. And I will therefore focus on 3 core points. First, an introduction to my line of work on global citizenship education. Then how the idea of global citizenship education from an ethical perspective developed, and why the idea of ethical global citizenship in higher education is at the same time needed and powerful. And then I will discuss the 5 key elements of ethical global citizenship education, namely decolonialism, caring ethics, eco-critical views, global moral consciousness, and the humanity empowerment. And then I will conclude this webinar with a brief summary of the points discussed. And then, of course, I will give you an opportunity to ask me questions about the topic of ethical global citizenship in higher education. So let me begin by introducing my line of work on global citizenship education and how it developed in the last 8 to 10 years. I've been committed to international comparative education, citizenship education, and critical and ethical pedagogy for, I would say, more than 10 years by now. And so concerns with values and knowledge related to global citizenship, but also social justice and critical pedagogy have been central to my research work internationally, particularly in the UK, the United States, and East Asia, as well as, of course, my teachings at several universities in Japan and internationally. And so in 2016, a major university here in Japan asked me to design a course on global citizenship education that would help our learners to become informed, responsible global citizens. And so that is when I started to develop an interest in the topic of global citizenship education. And so what is global citizenship education? According to UNESCO, global citizenship education is concerned with fostering the knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes that learners need to be able to contribute to a more inclusive, just, and peaceful world. And yet, as I looked in more depth into the concept of global citizenship education, I soon realized that global citizenship education is a multifaceted, super complex notion with theoretical orientations ranging from neoliberal to humanistic, transformative to critical. And so, for example, the notion of global citizenship education can be intended to promote competition, where the word global suggests, above all, a focus on making students ready for the international job market and thereby fostering global human resources rather than critical global citizens. And so this is the case of a more neoliberal approach to global citizenship education. And yet, as my research work developed across the global North and the global South, I had the opportunity to meet and engage in a dialogue with several scholars truly committed to educating critical thinkers. And I learned that global citizenship education is also about developing critical consciousness so that students, our students, can achieve an in-depth and critical understanding of the world, allowing for the perception and exposure of social and political contradictions characterizing our societies. And I use societies on purpose. So from this perspective, I came to realize how important it is to avoid a simplified use of global citizenship education, for instance, as a fashionable synonym for internationalization or even international learning outcomes, without giving a real meaning and a critical strategic focus to it. And in addition, I also became aware that as a form of cultural politics, global citizenship education implies not only the transfer of knowledge and the development of skills, but also the development of students' critical values such as justice, fairness, equity, respect, and integrity. And it also became apparent to me that in teaching global citizenship education to our students, we, the educators, cannot and should not remain neutral in the political and cultural struggle for bettering the world. And therefore, I approached my research work as an opportunity, I would say, to engage critically with global citizenship education and to gain insights on whether the notion of a global citizenship education could represent, at least potentially, a distinct pedagogical framework to reimagine citizenship education in a more ethical perspective, which has its foundation in critical, transformative, humanistic, and value-creating theories. And therefore, global citizenship education, as it is discussed in this webinar today and in my scientific publications, is not an educational philosophy that exists for a global elite. Global citizenship education, as discussed in this seminar today, is an ethical platform, a pedagogy of value, a pedagogy of hope, oriented towards social justice that offers our students a meaningful way to examine our shared planet. So what is ethical global citizenship education then? Ethical global citizenship education is a reflective educational framework that fosters ethical principles, for example, fairness, equality, compassion, integrity. Ethical global citizenship education also develops students' global understanding, self-awareness, cross-cultural compassion, a sense of accountability for achieving the common good at home, locally, and overseas, a readiness to speak out and become actively involved in efforts to address key issues of shared global concern and human values, such as, for example, empathy and unity towards sustainability. So ethical global citizenship education represents a pedagogical approach through which educators make a distinct commitment to students' liberation of the human spirit toward critical and global justice concepts. The concept of a global ethic informs and inspires ethical global citizenship education. And so the notion of global ethic, when used in the context of our discussion on ethical global citizenship education, refers to all components of the learning teaching process, as well as components of the student experience. And so this becomes a conceptualization of global citizenship pedagogy, in which educators make a distinct commitment to learners' emancipation of the human spirit. And so I would suggest that from an ethical perspective, some of the central orientations of global citizenship education are promoting social justice and a reduction of global and local inequality. Now, the aim of an ethical global citizenship education, an ethically oriented global citizenship education, then becomes assisting our learners in reflecting critically on their opinions, and also to assist them in being part of the creation of a new future with its roots in social justice and sustainability. And this fundamentally encompasses 5 key elements, which are the core focus of this webinar today: decolonialism, caring ethics, eco-critical views, global moral consciousness, and humanity empowerment. And so these 5 elements are not only rooted in my theoretical work, they often returning themes as I advance my empirical studies on ethical and critical values in citizenship education with teachers worldwide. And so let me now discuss these 5 key elements of ethical global citizenship in higher education. So the type of ethical global citizenship education I discuss in this seminar promotes decoloniality and diversity rather than neutral universal subjectivities. Globalization, unfortunately, is asymmetrical, and there is not an equal balance of power between the global north and the global south. And so I contend that the problems that must be addressed in this context are those of injustice and inequality, and not only poverty and or development. And so in this view, I do believe that an ethical global citizenship education demands that educators develop a critical literacy supporting learners, our learners, to undertake an analysis of their preconceptions, positions, and identity as they relate to the complexities of local and global structures. And so what I'm suggesting here is that we must develop in our learners what I define as hyper self-reflexivity, with a pedagogical focus on this sensus that would assist learners in dealing with the complexity and paradox. And here I just want to mention the Argentinian sociologist Rick Dossel and his work on Eurocentrism. So this is an example that in some cases I discuss with my students, because Dossel explains that modernity is characterized by a Eurocentric paradigm. And so Eurocentrism is often justified with reference to the belief that Europe has these exceptional internal characteristics that explain its superiority over other cultures, for example. And so Europe is often positioned at the center of a world system. And so Dossel describes Eurocentrism as a super ideology that establishes the legitimacy of the domination of the world system by its center, and therefore it justifies its colonialist functions. And I thought this was a relevant example within the colonial element of ethical global citizenship education. Now, let me address the second element, caring ethics. So, ethical global citizenship education promotes Sanz Ignatius' concept of cura personalis in Latin, or caring ethics in English, while encouraging learners to care for individuals and human rights as a foundational pillar. So from this perspective, I suggest that educators' approaches to ethical global citizenship in higher education should be founded in a compassionate ethics and attempts to comprehend, grasp, analyze, and find a resolution for the contemporary crisis of migration, for example. And so this ethical global citizenship education approach represents what I define a pursuit of holistic education encompassing outcomes that include spirituality, art, aesthetics, and ethics, of course, as well as ambitions toward the creation of peace in line with the UNESCO Commission report of Jacques Delors titled Learning, the Treasure Within. And this emphasizes the importance of living in harmony with one another and with the rest of the planet. Let me now address the third element, eco-critical perspective. So within this, I would say, dynamic discussion about what's going on with our environment worldwide, ethical global citizenship education encourages ecological consciousness and supports, at least potentially, learners to examine injustice created by humanity's perception that he is the supreme being on earth. And so by swapping out ego for eco, we can move the focus away from a human-centric attitude. And therefore, one of the objectives of the ethical global citizenship education is to foster in our students eco-ethical consciousness that considers the environmental and social impacts caused by human decisions that are effectively indivisible from what surrounds us, nature and living beings, other living beings. And so in this context, it is interesting to bring in the notion of more than human, which describe the more substantial ecological relationships that prevail on our planet, exclusively based on those systems that only focus on human-to-human relationships. And so the more than human notion is central to our discussion on ethical global citizenship education because it encompasses rocks, soil, forests, streams, animals, and plants to make the point that the notion of interconnectedness goes beyond human beings and comprises all living beings. And therefore, in my discussion on ethical global citizenship education, I advocate for an eco-pedagogy oriented towards fostering consciousness about the intertwined human-environment relationships that demands an amalgamation of education for and through social and ecological justice. And so there is a concept I would like to briefly mention with you today for the first time, because I'm working on it with Carlos Alberto Torres, and it is the concept of el buen vivir, la vida buena. And this is a concept that has been integrated in the Ecuadorian constitution in 2008, I believe, and the Bolivian constitution in 2009. And it describes a way of acting in society that is community-centric, ecologically balanced, and culturally sensitive in the ongoing construction of a more just and peaceful world. And so the notion of buen vivir, la buena vida, is relevant to our discussion on the eco-critical elements of ethical global citizenship, because buen vivir includes commitments on quality of living, and not only from the materialistic point of view, but also from the spiritual point of view. This ties with the fourth element, global moral consciousness. So the global moral consciousness element of ethical global citizenship I discussed in this webinar encompasses the cultivation of a type of humanistic consciousness that transcends national, ethnic, geographic, and even religious boundaries. And so this approach is core because it consists of an awareness of other perspectives, a single humanity as the primary level of community, and the moral conscience to act for the good of the world. And so this also encompasses elements of autonomy and carefulness. And so from this perspective, I propose a vision of ethical global citizenship as being modes of thought and action with the basis in the connection of humanity with autonomy and carefulness at the center. However, autonomy here does not mean that the student is a separate entity from society. It rather involves educators cultivating the student's relationship with others. And so their support must develop the student's appreciation for the notion of carefulness towards the other, where the other has a capital O. And so this refers to the influence of the individual situation. And it proposes that it is possible to be responsible for one's personal life and philosophy, but at the same time to care for others. And so humanity as a foundation that allows learners, at least hypothetically, to improve their human potential by reflection and dialogue, and acquiring the necessary resources for living a worthwhile life based on the notion of carefulness, but also living in harmony with others on the basis of a moral code, and assisting others also in living valuable lives. Lastly, let me address the fifth and last element, empowering humanity. This is an ongoing work that I'm doing, and it will take perhaps a couple of years, but I think is an essential element. So I'll keep it short for this webinar, and perhaps in the future we can meet again and rediscuss empowering humanity. But what I will say is this: I do believe that empowering humanity requires ethical global citizenship to open a path for the personal improvement of every student. And so the term empowering humanity or humanity empowerment is often used interchangeably with collective emancipation, because both at least theoretically, entail waging a struggle against inequality. There is a subtle difference, however. Collective emancipation stresses flattening the power relations that exist between groups. On the other hand, empowering humanity extends beyond the political level by embracing all aspects of human behavior. And so, ethical global citizenship education, as the one I discussed today in this webinar, must therefore emphasize an interpersonal dimension which recognizes the human drive to live harmoniously and responsibly with others. And therefore, it fundamentally rejects notions of killing, notions of wars, and it promotes a non-killing society. And so this discussion extends in two directions, as our students, on the one hand, desire to contribute to, and by others, and simultaneously receive support from their immediate environment. In summary, I believe that the type of global citizenship education we need today and in the future is ethically oriented. It fosters in our learners ethical and critical knowledge and values based on 5 key elements. The first one is decolonialism. The second one is caring ethics. The third one is eco-critical views. The fourth one is global moral consciousness. And the fifth one is humanity empowerment in the process. In terms of practical application, ethical global citizenship education can be taught as a 5-dimensional framework, although this might expand to more dimensions, with educators working to implement into their curriculum and pedagogy 5 dimensions of decolonialism, caring ethics, eco-critical views, global moral consciousness, and humanity empowerment. And so each dimension, at least potentially, reflects a significant developmental route with specific characteristics that educators might decide to incorporate into their teachings and pedagogy to help students become value creators, emancipated, informed, and actively involved global citizens. And so to foster ethical global citizens requires flexibility, requires deep understanding, and requires educators creating programs that function across all 5 domains. And so this process, we should call it this pedagogical journey, does not have to follow a predetermined order or a linear path. In fact, as you can see on screen, it can be viewed and interpreted by educators as circular. So for instance, establishing learners' caring ethics might lead to a later extension in the boundaries of one's identity and consciousness, or vice versa, developing a sense of empowerment and eco-critical view might lead to a later realization of a caring ethics disposition in the lifespan of the individual learner. And I want to briefly mention that the notion of time in this discussion is very, very important. I didn't speak to that, but we have to develop this capability to really look into the future and understand the lives of our students, not as they relate only to the classroom setting or from year 1 to year 5 and then after graduation, but in the process of their lives, what they can achieve, how they can contribute to society in a way that is sustainable. So this would bring in all the discussion about the importance of time in pedagogy, but we can discuss that another time. So coming back to this discussion, from the perspective of ethical global citizenship, what I suggest is that educators must promote a reorientation of learners' responsibility towards an orientation that adheres to the belief that knowing without acting is insufficient. And so we might have underestimated ethical values in academia. And yet ethical values are, or at least should be, a key part of our pedagogy, teaching and research, particularly when it comes to global citizenship in higher education. And so my webinar today was about ethical global citizenship in higher education as it can be potentially taught in our institutions of higher education in this specific case. And so I suggest that ethical global citizenship education should be part of an educational policy that is technically competent, ethically sound, and politically feasible. Ethical global citizenship education should find a special place in our university's curricula because in its ethical essence raises questions not only about the meaning of global citizenship itself, it also brings into view matters of the purposes of higher education and the kinds of human beings that higher education seeks to develop in the 21st century, the era of globalization, and particularly in relation to the responses of higher education to neoliberal globalization and what we mean by ethical values and knowledge in higher education. So let me conclude this webinar with a quote from Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom. Education is the great engine of personal development. It is through education that the daughter of a peasant can become a doctor and the son of a mine worker can become the head of the mine, and that the child of a farm workers can become the president of a great nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bosio. This has been a great presentation, and it's very important in the times of crisis. We indeed need to understand how to prepare students who are value creators, as you said, who are cura personalis. I myself thinking how we can really make these essential, or as you said, foundational pillars for learning, so that our students become global citizens who can empower humanity and lead their communities and societies for buen vivir. I like those kind of emphasis that you made in your presentation. So let me invite our colleagues, participants in the room to ask questions. If you have any questions or comments, please raise your hand by using the reactions button on your screen, or just kind of somehow give us a signal. And also, please feel free to type in your questions into the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, if you want to get in touch, I just copy and pasted the some of my contact details in the chat, so feel free also.
Great. Okay, I can see one comment from Yansin Shao.
Yeah, I can. Will you read it, Anatoly, or shall I just speak to the question? What is the best?
Yeah. I'll probably read. Everyone probably can see it. Yansin, you said, thank you for your impressive sharing. I'd like to ask, when should the educators begin global citizenship education? In primary school, secondary school, or higher education? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Yangsin. That's a great question. I believe the sooner better. So that means that, for example, my daughter is now 5 years old, and we try to speak about sustainability. She's asking me about the SDGs, and we discussed about the importance to, very in simple terms, the importance of pay attention about the environment, not wasting food, even the importance of dialogue and asking questions. This is all part of, promoting the notion of global citizenship. So oftentimes people see this notion of global citizenship as somewhat kind of removed from reality. A global citizen is someone who has to, travel extensively, meet a lot of people, and that's all good. But I think it starts from our own context, our own family, our own friends, daily life. And that's why it's really difficult to live as a global citizen, because a global citizen, at least from an ethical perspective, as I try to conceptualize it today, really needs to pay attention to each and every action he or she takes on a daily basis. And this is perhaps the most challenging part of living as a global citizen. And so to your question, as soon as possible. And I think it's complex to teach about certain issues, but I think it's also interesting and challenging, and requires the right amount of challenge that makes our job as educators interesting. So, for example, connecting local issues with global issues, the capability to speak to the level of the person we are speaking with. For example, while I believe that my daughter is really smart, she's still 5 years old. So of course I cannot speak to her in academic terms, same as with the, elementary school students. So you can turn the topic into something that is accessible, but at the same time, it sticks with the life of the student, so that he or she can eventually care about society. And I keep saying this in each and every seminar I'm invited to, that I don't believe that right now our education system is providing the right amount of quality and values and knowledge to our leaders, so that they can really pay attention to what's going on in our society. If it's all about business, if it's all about producing, then something is lacking in our educational system, and this must be addressed. So if the whole discussion about global citizenship helps us to move the focus on something that is more of related to sustainability, how, for example, we can deal with environmental crisis, how we can deal with the proliferation of nuclear weapons, how we can deal with ongoing conflicts, how we can deal with this race of armaments that is ongoing and keeps growing and growing, and there is no dialogue. And then so how we can even if we disagree with the world leader in another country, how we can come to the table and have a discussion where the common goal is to really seek peace. I don't see that as taught as much as it should be, even in prestigious universities such as Oxford, Cambridge, and others. And I mention these universities because everyone knows them, but even here in Japan, I mean, the discussion should start really early in age about the importance of dialogue and peace and sustainability. I've been long, but I think this was a central question because the starting age is very, very important, because we think that at the age of 4, 5, even 3, young kids don't understand, but they actually, and I speak as a father, my daughter really absorbs and memorizes and then processes everything I say, how I say it, how I explain it. So, Young Sin, I hope I addressed your question in the best possible way.
Thank you. I can see the hand risen first by Dr. Sukardi Weda, and then yes. I see also 3 more questions, but maybe let's start with Sukardi.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Sukardi Weda. I'm from Indonesia. Thank you.
Hi, Sukardi.
Okay, thank you. Talking about global citizenship in education and social justice is very important. It's a very interesting topic to discuss. And therefore, my comment is, many people, many students from poor country, from poor people in developing countries cannot access higher education. So my simple question is, how can they contribute? I repeat, how can they contribute to their community or in the global citizenship in the peaceful world if they do not have knowledge and skills, because it is very difficult to access the quality of education, at higher education? Thank you.
This is an excellent question. Thank you, Sukardi. So the issue of accessibility is a core one, in the sense that, as I mentioned in my presentation, there is no balance between the global north and the global south as of today. So that's evident, that's a fact. And I'm glad that this whole discussion about what does it mean to be a global citizen and global citizenship brings on the table, or brings again on the table, the whole issue of accessibility. Fortunately, now, but again, this is an issue within an issue, but at least with new technologies, there is a little bit more of accessibility, but yet there is a strong imbalance between the global north and the global south. So your question is central. And for example, what I did, I tried to take a small step. I did this book project with Youssef Fatid in South Africa, where we tried to collect voices from the global south on the notion of global citizenship, not only to understand their pedagogical experiences and journeys, but really to understand what were the challenges and the struggles there. And here we're talking about people who, because they are very lucky, they are still highly educated, they are teaching at university, but through their voices, we realize that, there is still this huge gap between the potential that the global south has, and that it is not at the moment translated into reality, and what could be in reality the support and wonderful perspectives that they can come from developing countries. So it would take another webinar for me to share the all lessons that I learned from the global south, that are all discussed in this book called Global Citizenship Education in the Global South, published by Bro, the one that I showed at the beginning of my presentation. I believe I copied the link in the chat. So if you're interested, Sukardi, you can take a look when you have time. So that collects important voices from the global south, and And I really, truly hope that is a small contribution to really embrace the voices from the global south and give more resonance to this potential.
Great.
Okay. Excellent presentation. Brilliant answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Sukardo.
Thank you very much. I have a question from Soyeon Lee. It is thanks. If it is sooner the better, then what would be the distinctive role of higher education and citizenship education, distinguished from other levels of education?
Yeah, I'm very happy about the questions. Excellent question. So I believe if we start soon, if we start early in age, and I hope this is the direction of at least some institutions, perhaps not so many, but are trying to undertake by, for example, implementing within second language teachings some of the concept of global citizenship, SDGs, etc., discussing with students through, for example, literacy programs and so on, books, readings. There is all literature that is emerging on the topic of global citizenship. In this case, once that is consolidated, I think the role of higher education will be to rediscuss critically and take this to another level, a more academic level, where students not only would theorize about the concept, but would start to think how they can take actions in society. And so that, for example, would mean how they are going to contribute practically to the local community, what kind of initiatives they would like their politicians to take, and try to write a letter and request that these actions for the community are taken as soon as possible, so that they can help elderly, they can help people who are less lucky than us, and they don't have for example, the capability to sustain their lives. There are many ways where students can, in universities, can be taken to another level, where, in my opinion, I would say this, to really the core of my answer is, in higher education, you take the theory and you connect it, and at least you try potentially to work on some ideas on how this theory can be connected to practice and therefore action in society. And then it's up to each individual student and their colleagues to find creative and effective ways to translate this into society. Civic engagement and all of that would open a very big other discussion. Perhaps today we don't have a time. We could organize another webinar.
Thank you.
So
I can see a message from Soyeon saying, should it be part of a disciplinary education? That, in other terms, should be a component of a liberal arts education, or should it go beyond that?
I think it could be really implemented transdisciplinary within the core of the curriculum, and then would then, for example, would then be up to each individual teacher find ways to connect to a certain element. So, for example, if you want to emphasize the eco-critical part because you want to emphasize the problem that we have with our environments, that you would focus on that. But perhaps then you can reconnect this topic with topic related to colonization, so decolonialism, because it's all connected. It's all connected. What, domination involves environmental destruction. And so there is a connection that is visible, but then it's up to the individual educator to bring that on the table and discuss with the students through readings that can be explicit, less explicit, direct, less direct, as long as the whole discussion then would reconnect with the framework.
Excellent. Thank you. I see appreciative comments from Ihan from Thailand, as well as Branson Andres from Sophia University. Branson asks a question about curriculum in terms of how it might look. And I'd say, given that we have limited time, maybe if you might suggest a strategy or two on how to assess that kind of learning experience in a classroom.
So how will an ethical GCE curriculum look like in practice? What assessment strategy? So this is another excellent question that would require at least 1 hour of discussion. So it's very difficult to answer this question, which, by the way, is an excellent question because speak to pedagogy specifically and curriculum, of course. I want to say this. I want to say that before we find tools and strategies, we must find the soul of the student in our classroom. And in this case, Branson, I assume you will be a prospective educator, or you will probably work in higher education or related. But I believe the type of idealistic vision that ethical GCE brings on the table is not without a purpose. The purpose is that we need utopic and idealistic ideas so that people bring back discussions about, for example, their vision, their dreams. Getting a job is important. Strategies to get the best possible job in the best possible corporation to some people have top priority. But here we are discussing strategies to really help students, learners, and ourselves to care more about the planet, to care more about ethical values. And so that is the first step. Then when it comes to, I want to add a little bit more because otherwise it seems I'm escaping the hard part. When it comes to assessing how a student would learn the concepts, we can use traditional approaches. For example, a short writing or a dialogue with a student, a group dialogue where, you know, the word assessment, in my opinion, is often misinterpreted by the educator and by the students, in the sense that I assess my student, you know, based on what they can share in terms of what they really processed within themselves about a specific concept. So, for example, if we're talking about the importance of the environment, I want a specific student to be able to explain in simple terms why we need to protect our environment. What are the causes behind certain needs that we have in terms of environmental crisis? Who caused that? What are the deep-rooted causes that are you know, behind certain effects? So I mean, it will take a long time to answer about strategies to assess, but I'm not so concerned about assessment at this stage. I'm more concerned about really reuniting and sort of bringing back on the table the discussion about values, ethical values, the common good, el buen vivir, the importance of students really developing hope that they can really, and potentially they can, make a strong and sustainable contribution to society. I think this hope nowadays is getting less and less and less. At least this is what I note with some of my students, and then I really want to encourage them to transform this. And so the ethical GCE, the ethical global citizenship, perhaps could be a way to really reinforce this hope for the future So I will leave it there. It will take a long discussion to answer about tools and strategies, but perhaps we can also organize that in the future.